This is part 2 of a 3-part episode. And yes, part 1 and part 3 are already out. So go on and check out those other episodes. We'll see you there. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I am with Anthony from Melt Pizza Company. And today we're going to talk about Detroit style pizza, but more importantly, dough management, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's been a process for you learning how to do that, from making pizzas in your home oven to going to a ghost kitchen and providing pizzas at an even bigger scale to now opening a restaurant, all within 2-ish years. And I'm sure this topic of dough management has evolved. So maybe talk about how you started and where you are today when it comes to dough management.
I think I just started with a basic recipe. I Googled pizza dough recipe, looked for something that told me it would take 24 hours. I'm like, oh shit, that's got to be a good one. It takes a day. That was not a very good pizza. And then from there, I started being like, okay, well, I need to do a little more research. So the first cookbook I got, which I feel like any aspiring pizza maker now I realize has gotten, is Pizza Bible by Tony Gemignani. I ordered that up, checked that out. That had a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of great things to think about, to learn, to take away from. And then I also got an uni a couple months in. So I was like, yeah, maybe I'll make wood-fired pizzas. Got that. Those pizzas were not very good either. And then I wanted to try Detroit style really bad. And that was the first pizza that I made that was actually like good. And I think it's because it was made in a pan, so there's a little less room for error. You're not getting pizza stuck on the paddle, breaking on the stone, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's what helped. But then I really tried to dial that in. And the biggest thing for me that I ended up doing that got me to where I wanted to be was I actually learned about slow rise pizza. I started taking those classes because that was kind of one of the more unique things to come out of COVID was, you had Neil, who was a pizza consultant, who pivoted his business to doing virtual trainings. And I think that allowed for a larger audience to learn this craft of how to make quality dough. I took the beginner class. That helped me tremendously. Then 2 weeks later, I took the intermediate class. And then 2 weeks later, I took the next class. And over the course of like 3 months, I took 5-6 of the classes. And that's truly what taught me how to understand fermentation, how to understand time and temperature, how to understand what different flour strengths do. I mean, that taught me everything that I needed to know to take this operation to learn how to do Detroit style or any style of pizza, and how to make dough work around your schedule and your end game. And I was able to take that knowledge, and then, I was able to do 100 or 150 doughs in one sitting and get those ready for our pop-up services. To now we're up to, I think we're in the neighborhood of almost 1,000 pizzas a week right now. And we'll probably be north of that coming this summer here. That toolbox that I was given by taking those classes is what ultimately unlocked what I needed to figure out how to do this effectively and do it right, and just get the product that I was looking for in my head, at least to a pretty good degree. I mean, I'm always going to be changing my dough and always looking for a better product, a better result, but that's what got me to be able to do what I'm able to do now.
So for those who can't take the classes, can you give us a quick summary, high level, on how to get 150 doughs ready for service if they're doing a pop-up?
The biggest thing that anyone should know when they're dealing with dough is that it's a living organism. Everything that goes into it affects it. And when I mean everything, like the flour, the water, the yeast, the ambient temperature, the temperature of the water, the temperature of the flour, the relative humidity, how long you're going to let it sit. All of these things play a factor, and you just need to be knowledgeable of what those factors are. I think in the very first class, he teaches you to just temp everything and take notes of everything. I think the way that Neil put it is, if you make the best pizza you've ever made, you're going to want to remember how you did it so you can do it again. And also, if you made the worst pizza ever, you need to figure out what the problem was. So it's really helpful for aspiring and young pizza makers to just take everything into account. And then from there, you can learn how to, I guess, get like one way to the end result. So like our product is different than where I started it, just because of the volume we're at, the environment we're at is different now. So it has to be different. But because I know how much, like what temperature water to use, how much yeast to put in. I can make the same dough in 3 hours of time or 18 hours of time. I know the different variables to manipulate it to get it to when you want to use it and have it not blow out or be underdeveloped, overproofed, underproofed, all that stuff. Just being aware of your surroundings is the biggest first part of making dough that I learned.
Is there any truth to slower dough has more flavor if you're doing something like a 3-hour dough per se?
I do feel that there is a lot of truth in that. Our New York dough, I like to mix that, and then I don't like to use that for 24 hours minimum at a cold ferment. Now, that dough doesn't have any starter. Our Detroit dough, it's 40% poolish overnight starter, but then it's a quick dough because I need to get the doughs in pans. I need to get them proofed, and then we Parbake our product, which is a very controversial topic in Detroit style, but I need these things Parbaked before we open at noon. So I traded off a longer ferment, but by using stuff like starter or poolish or sourdough or whatever name you want to call for a starter, that adds flavor for sure when you can't just let it sit in the fridge for periods of time. But you generally want to have some sort of time or enhancement to give it a little more flavor. Otherwise, it does end up pretty flat.
Flat, bland, tasteless. Those are different words that we could use, right? I've definitely had my fair share of those. And when you're prepping 150 doughs a day to 1,000 doughs a week, whatever the case may be, especially with Detroit style, are you doing something called staging where you are, getting some out at a few at a time? Are you just doing everything at once? Can you dive in a little bit deeper about your process there?
Yeah, we kind of do everything at once. My poolish sits in the mixer all in one batch. We do one big batch of a mix, and then we'll usually cut it out of the mixer in portions because usually my sister will do anywhere. Sometimes she'll do 2 days worth. Tomorrow for Friday, she's going to have to do 250 in one go. So she'll cut it out in chunks, put it on the table, then she'll cut and portion, let's say 50 of them, stack those up, and then keep going 50 stack, 50 stack, 50 stack. And then she'll go back around and we'll push them all out so they're all flat, stack them back up. And then we let them proof while the oven's warm. And then we just Parbake all in one row. So yeah, essentially we're doing everything in one fell swoop, but we've had to play with it because what I just described was about 6 hours from the start of the mix to the finish of the Parbakes. You got to make sure your temperature and your yeast level and all those stuffs are right so you don't overproof it. That's where I'm talking about when I know my dough is going to be ready at like say 10 o'clock to be baked before we open at noon. Like that's where it needs to be tight. And I get the same results because of knowing what the temperatures are and everything that went into it. And we're very consistent here.
Are you looking to level up your pizza game? If so, I highly suggest that you check out Ooni, the unrivaled leader when it comes to pizza ovens. Ooni pizza ovens are a total game changer. With the ability to reach up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll have the power to be able to make the pizza of your dreams. What I love about Ooni is their portability and versatility. You can bring them anywhere, or you can keep them on your patio or in your backyard. And you can make a ton of different styles of pizza with it. They're so fun to use. And guess what? You can use them to start your pizza business too. So whether you're a passionate home pizza baker or a budding entrepreneur, you gotta get with Ooni. Use the affiliate link in the show notes. That way, you can let my sponsors know that you heard about them through What's Good Dough. Thank you for supporting me and my sponsors. How do you stay consistent with the temperature? Do you have an air conditioner? Do you have a dough room? Are you checking the temperature the night before, the weather forecast? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't have any of those nice toys like a temperature room or anything. I have a pretty hot, humid restaurant. So I check the weather and then I'll adjust we don't really adjust the yeast level anymore. We'll really just adjust the water temperature to go into our mix. If it's a humid, more hot day, I'll chill that water down. When we were in winter, that water gets warmer. When we're doing a larger volume of dough, because it's a larger mass, I'll also drop that stuff down because, a larger mass holds temperature longer. It populates faster. So if I'm doing a batch 20 versus 200, you're going to tweak that too because it's not the same answer.
Okay. And I think one of the final questions I want to wrap this segment up with, earlier you mentioned the Parbake versus the direct bake for Detroit style, and you chose to do a Parbake. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. Obviously, it's a preference, but just curious to know what your preference is. I mean, why? Why you chose that to do it that way?
My preference has always been Parbake. That is a style that I learned from Tony Gemignani, Jeff Smokovich out in Blue Pan, who won the World Cup with Detroit style in 2014 Parbakes. A lot of these great Detroit styles that I've found are Parbaked. And I think it's because it allows you to, well, A, it gives you flexibility to bake it later or bake it when you want to, make that schedule work for you. B, we need to do it out of necessity when we were doing the pop-ups because we did the dough, say on Sundays at a bakery when they were closed. And then we weren't serving till Monday or Tuesday. So I just had to do it that way. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do my pop-ups. And C, I'm just more partial to the end result. I think I get an even crispier, crackery bottom crust while still retaining a light, airy inside. And then it really holds up well to the toppings. I mean, there's some trade-off. You don't get the Maillard reaction or whatever they call it as much where the cheese coagulates with the dough, but you also don't get problems of like the pizzas deflating or gum line or any of those unattractive parts. And also it cuts our bake time down from, I can turn a pizza out of our Pizza Master in 9 to 11 minutes versus a direct bake. You're looking at 20 plus. So when you're trying to do volume and get stuff going and get people in and out of there, you almost have to Parbake.
What's interesting is if you mess up that direct dough and your customer's waiting for that pizza and you have to refire, oh my goodness, it's the longest time in the world. You're like, can you cook any faster?
Yep.
Pizza Master.
Absolutely.
And about the whole, deflating thing, I've been actually testing around my pan style dough. I still have yet to figure out Detroit style pizza in a sourdough version. I'm getting slightly closer. But since I'm doing a bunch of tests, I've been doing a direct bake versus Parbake. And I've seen that whole deflation thing where, sometimes it'll go up and then all of a sudden the toppings kind of cave in and you have more of a crust here. And I didn't like that, but I did like maybe the tenderness of the pizza a bit more. And so there are those trade-offs, and really it just comes down to seeing what you like. And who knows, maybe there is a way to get a more tender pizza with Parbake. I think it just really depends on what you think is your desired result and figure out how to get there.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Any final tips for someone making Detroit style pizza, something that you have mastered and want to share with the world?
Man, Detroit style is a tough style. It's a very finicky style. The biggest things that I learned that frustrated me a lot were with that style, you can get away with undermixing your dough because it allows you to push it out more gently. If you're having trouble with your corners or your edges snapping back at you, use Crisco. I swear, Crisco bonds it to the sides. You're going to be good. Those are my biggest 2 tips because those were my most troublesome areas of learning that style. And let it rise enough. If you don't let it rise enough, then you're going to have this weird, thin little kind of funky thing. You can almost overproof. Sometimes the doughs get overproofed and they're kind of nice because they're big and pillowy still with the crispy bottom. Don't be afraid to let that dough hang out a little longer than maybe you should for that style.
I second all of these. Oh my goodness. But especially the undermixing thing. What's funny is I told myself that that's what I was going to play around with next because I felt like the dough kept resisting me. And I'm over here managing my acidity on my sourdough. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm getting borderline overproofed, which is okay. But I'm getting to the point where it might get close to deflating and it was still resisting. And so maybe one final question on that, but what is your mixing process? Are you just getting everything incorporating and then putting it in pans? Are you doing stretch and folds? And if so, how many? Can you let me know?
We have a spiral mixer. I actually have 2 of them. We have a smaller one and a really big boy. Our process is we do the poolish the night before, and then we come in, we toss in the water, the yeast, then the flour. Then I like to give that a mix for, these times are relative, but no more than 5 minutes, a pretty gentle mix. And then I do what some would consider an auto lease, but technically the yeast is in there, so it's not. But let it hang out for a little bit, let the flour, let it all kind of marry and incorporate. And then the biggest thing I learned was from, can't remember his name right now. He's out of Portland.
Brian Spangler?
Yes, Brian Spangler. I was watching him with Peter Reinhardt on one of their talks. He actually said to kick the mixer in reverse for 30 seconds because then it pulls everything up from the bowl and kind of gently reincorporates. And then we do a final spin of a mix for about 3 minutes. Then I let it sit for a half an hour. I do another 30-second because this acts as a stretch and fold. And then we pull it out and pan and stuff from there. So like I say, those times are pretty relative, but if you're doing it at home, basically undermix it by like 10 to 15%, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Okay. When do you add your salt?
We add the salt after that first spin. So we do that first spin, sit, reverse. Then we add the salt, and we actually add oil. We have salt and oil in our dough. So we add the salt and the oil on the last 5-minute-ish turn.
Nice. Okay. So for anyone wondering, there is a little bit of a term that's been thrown around. I don't know if it's official, but they call it fermentolise. Fermentolise? I don't know. But basically it's letting your dough, which is the flour, the water, the yeast, all incorporate together, similar to an autolyse, where the difference would be you just do flour and water. But in a fermentolise, it's flour, water, yeast, and then you add the salt later on, and oil in Anthony's case.
Yeah, I haven't heard that term, but I like that.
There you go. All right. Everyone, tune into the next part of this episode. We're going to talk a little bit more about food photography because Anthony was a photographer for many years and he is killing it with his food pics. So maybe we can grab a couple of tips to apply to our own lives. But thank you for tuning in and make sure to tune into the next episode. How's it going, Pizza Pal? I just want to let everyone know that I started an email list. Why? Because I recognize that time is more important than ever, especially after being a dad. And I realize that content is abundant and sometimes we just can't get to listening to a podcast. And so what I want to do is send out a weekly newsletter highlighting some of the key topics that we discussed in the podcast. I hope to save you a bunch of time, so please do sign up for this email list. There's going to be a link in the show notes. I truly appreciate it, and I hope I can save you some time. So thank you in advance for signing up for that email newsletter. Thank you for listening to the What's Good Dough podcast. Make sure to check out the show notes where you'll find links to my Patreon, email list, and the links to all my sponsors. You'll also find the contact info for today's guest too. Before we sign off today, I'd love it if you could support me by rating and reviewing this show. It helps so much when it comes to growing the show. Also, please share this episode with a friend, family member, or fellow pizza baker, especially if you think it'll add value to their lives. You can copy the link to this podcast and send it on over to them, or you can even share it via social media. If you do that, please tag me. I'd greatly appreciate it. Last but not least, I'd love it if you subscribe to the show. That way you can get notified anytime there's a new podcast. I appreciate you for listening. I love you. Till next time. Peace. Hey, home pizza makers. What's good, dough? It's time for you and me to partner up together and make pizzas for good. How do we do that? You and I will be doing pizza parties nationwide to raise money for Slice Out Hunger. And yes, it is starting now. So if you want to be a part of my team and make pizzas for good, you can register to be a part of Team What's Good Dough. And yes, it is welcome to all bakers, whether you're just starting off or you're a seasoned pop-up pro. Let's make pizza for good together.